On Friday, voters will go to the polls to decide on whether to remove or to keep the 8th Amendment from our Constitution.
Order! Can you not see it's order?
This was the most historically divisive issue in Ireland ever.
We've waited 35 years. We've just 1 week to do it, and we're going to bring it home.
Women are still travelling, women are still in danger.
This government needs to protect women's lives.
We absolutely have to do something.
What they're trying to do is take God out of society.
Sadly, the answer is, well, just get rid of it, instead of, what do you need?
There was that sense that women couldn't be trusted.
And I think the women of Ireland have rolled over for long enough.
Why can't I love glitz and glamour and still feel passionately about women's rights? Imagine if you could get this army of women putting that pressure on and to feel empowered.
Something magical happened where it became a symbol of women's equality in Ireland.
All these stories being somehow set free to try and change the country.
It's actually about the value that we're putting on women in Irish society.
People do recognise it's a kind of a backlash. What happens here in Ireland will have a knock-on effect.
We are creating an Ireland which values women, our bodies, our choices, ourselves, our lives, absolutely equally.
Hello, my name is Lucy Kennedy. I am one of the 3 directors of the 8th, along with Maeve O'Boyle and Aideen Kane. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined tonight by 4 phenomenal women on this panel about building solidarity, global reproductive rights activism. So the first person that we to introduce is Marlan Hassan. She is a Gibraltar Member of Parliament and a historian. She is founder of Together Gibraltar, and which started out as a civil society group and is now a reformist party in, she's an MP in the Parliament in Gibraltar and is been a strong proponent of reproductive rights. So we're thrilled to have her here. Sonia Spoo is Director of Reproductive Rights Campaign at Ultraviolet in the United States. It's an organization that seeks to fight sexism in politics, media, and government. And one of Sonia's specialties is looking at these issues through the intersection of race, gender, and faith. Wanda Nowicka is a member of the Polish Parliament and a leading opposition figure. She's co-founder of the Federation for Women and Family Planning and former deputy speaker of the Polish Parliament. She's a long-time activist in the field, so we're delighted to have you on that. And Alva Smith is, well, will need no introduction for those of you that have seen the film, but Alva is a long-time activist and campaigner on feminist and LGBTQ issues. And she was the convener of the Coalition to Repeal the 8th Amendment and one of the 3 co-directors of the campaign Together for Yes. Just to say that we come from different parts of Europe and the United States, so that will be primarily the focus of this discussion tonight, although we're well aware of many other issues in this space globally. Now, I would like to start with Marlan Hassan because she has the most immediate pressing issue with a referendum coming up on the 24th of June. So Marlan, I'd love you just to talk us through the situation there and what you're contending with.
Hi, good evening, Lucy. Thank you for the introduction and good evening to these other fabulous strong ladies in our panel. So obviously, as you know, we have a referendum to change the Crimes Act on the 24th of June, which is only a few weeks away, and we are in full campaign mode. Unlike Ireland, the and the legislation against abortion is not a constitutional issue. So technically speaking, it should have been legislated on, which is something that I have been campaigning for instead of a referendum. I am the leader of a third party in Parliament with only one seat. I am the only woman in the opposition benches, which I believe is it's a whole conversation in itself on how and why these things don't get legislated and get thrown out to the public when they shouldn't be. But here we are, and instead of changing the Crimes Act, government put a clause within that proposed legislation to insert a referendum, which would be the deciding factor for the change of the Crimes Act, depending on the results. So here we are, as you probably know much better than me, a very divisive campaign. Referendum was meant to happen last year on the third week of March, but it all got postponed because of COVID. So we're now back in the campaign again, back in the divisive modes and back in the whole thick of it, hoping that people will give women the right to have abortions in Gibraltar, to have choice laws, because at the moment women are simply going 20 minutes across our frontier to Spanish clinics, coming back with the stigma, without the healthcare that we deserve, and with all the taboos associated with what is going on. And meanwhile, the pro-life, or as I like to call it, the anti-choice side, is actually managing to create their own campaign, which is based on Save Babies, Vote No, which is complete nonsense, because we're not saving any babies when I can practically see the abortion clinic from my window. It's just simply a not in my backyard issue, which obviously us women want to do away with for the future of women in our society here.
Thank you very much. How are things looking? How are the polls looking? How is it going?
The truth is that before, on the first, what should have been the referendum last March, I believe that there was a lot of momentum on the choice side, but I'm afraid to say that given the fatigue post-COVID with regards to politics and anything frontline, I'm a little worried that people are less mobilized to go out and vote now after the year that everybody's had. And my genuine fear is that that lack of mobility could work in the anti-choice side, because I think, and I'm sure that the ladies will agree, they tend to be very organized. As much as they deny anything to do with religion, it's got a lot to do with religion most of the time. So they literally have their pulpit, their tools, their funding. So I think they're generally usually on the front foot as an organization lobby. And it is a worry, but obviously we're hopeful for a good outcome.
Sonia, speaking of pro-life organizations being very organized, there has been a long and organized, decades-long sort of campaign to push back against reproductive rights within the United States. I'm just wondering if you could sort of set the scene for where things are at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, the anti-choice side has been organized really since the late 70s. And they're kind of in their end game now. Under Trump, former President Trump, they were able to pack the courts in the US. We have several different court levels. They were able to pack the federal courts with a number of extremist judges who are anti-choice, including the former president getting 3 justices on our Supreme Court, which is our top court, which has ultimately been the place where we've been able to stop the majority of attacks against Roe v. Wade, which is the law that the constitutional case that decided that allowed abortion to be legal in the United States in 1973. Unfortunately, we're in a situation that because both the lower courts and ultimately the Supreme Court are now pretty firmly packed with anti-choice judges and justices, we are seeing the anti-choice movement really kick into gear in a big way to pass even more increasingly extreme abortion legislation in the states. So we operate on a federal system here in the United States, right? So we have our national laws, and then each state has their own set of laws and such. Most of the abortion restrictions that we see in the US are coming from the states. At the federal level, even under Trump, like legislation just hasn't moved, generally speaking, and for abortion has been a stalemate because the Democrats have been able to, rally enough pressure to stop laws, and there are some two anti or pro-choice Republicans at the federal level. At the states, however, we've seen over 400 abortion restrictions enacted in the past 10 years, anywhere from restrictions on how wide a clinic's hallways can be to now we're seeing 6-week bans. So bans on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, a time where most people have no idea if they are pregnant, of course. Formerly, these kind of laws would have been considered to be too extreme even by the anti-choice movement standards. They would have never pushed for these laws because they knew the Supreme Court or lower courts would strike them down. But because they now have their people on the benches here in the United States, they are basically doing test cases to see how far they can push the courts to undermine Roe v. Wade. Of course, even though we do have legal access to abortion in this country, if you're low income, if you are a person of color, if you live in rural parts of the country, you do not have access to abortion in any real terms, or you have to travel sometimes great distances in parts of this country to get access to care because clinics have been closed because of harassment, because of violence from the anti-choice movement, bombings, shootings, so forth, because of laws and lawsuits. It costs a lot of money to take a case to the Supreme Court. In most clinics, especially our independent clinics, they're operating on small margins here, and the anti-choice movement knows that. So even though they know they might get struck down in the courts, they still sue and still pass these legislations because they want to, basically wear clinics and the pro-choice movement down. So clinics have closed across the country over the last 20 years, making access to abortion even harder on top of the laws that have been enacted and the laws that have been stopped. So now we're in a situation where sometime in the fall, the Supreme Court will be hearing a case from Mississippi. The case is a 15-week ban case. So in Mississippi, they passed a law in 2018 that prohibited abortion after 15 weeks. This is a direct challenge to the Roe framework, which under Roe, there can be no restrictions on abortion up to 24 weeks, or viability, basically, or what was then considered to be viability in the 70s. This law was basically crafted and engineered by the anti-choice movement to challenge the Supreme Court's adherence to that precedent in Roe v. Wade that was then upheld again in Casey v. Planned Parenthood in the 90s. And now they know they have a much more friendly court than they did before, because we unfortunately lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg last year. So that gave Trump his third justice appointment. Before that, Anthony Kennedy was a swing vote on abortion cases, and he retired, which is how we got Kavanaugh on the bench of the Supreme Court, Justice Kavanaugh. And before that, the death of Antonin Scalia gave, and the obstructionism by the Republicans at the federal level gave Trump his first choice, which was Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. So we're in a situation where we have a case that could directly undermine the legal framework of Roe, which then could either harm abortion access in Mississippi only, if the Supreme Court decides very narrowly, or it could undermine abortion access across the country if the Supreme Court decides broadly that states can restrict abortion even before viability. Of course, we were organizing in a very big way to both show the court that their legitimacy is on the line. They have 40 plus years of precedent supporting abortion rights. And to undermine that now would greatly cast a pall over their legitimacy with the American public, which, despite how the media portrays it, is majority pro-choice and supports illegal access to abortion across race, class, and faith categories. And the media likes to portray it as being an equal split or being one way or the other. Majority of this country is pro-choice. And so,
Sonia, I was very surprised when I learned that statistic, actually, about, the majority of people across the society in the US being pro-choice. I do want to come back to the US, but I just want to ask Wanda. Wanda, similar to Sonia and the United States, as I understand it, Poland had more access to abortion, and then really with sort of populism and that sort of thing, there has been increasing clamping down. Can you talk a bit about where things are in Poland at the moment?
We background. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, thanks.
Okay. So Poland is one of those countries where legal abortion has been introduced at very early stage in 1956. So I was born in a time when abortion was legal and nobody was even thinking of possibility it could get restricted again. And then when Poland went through political transformation in the beginning of the 90s, then the change has come, also the negative part of it, which rise of conservatism, religious Catholic fundamentalism, and all things like that. And then illegal abortion has been introduced in 1993. Which basically delegalized abortion on so-called social grounds. Abortion on medical grounds, criminal grounds has been still legal, although hardly accessible. And in the 90s, myself and my organization we have been struggling to legalize, to have the legal abortion back. And even twice we succeeded, but then the parliament passed the law, more liberal law, but it was then vetoed by the president of Poland. And in the 21st century, we stopped hoping for having abortion legal because these conservatist forces increased. So in fact, more and more efforts have been made by those radical right to pass even more restrictions to the legislation. And actually what's happening in other countries with very strong anti-choice movement, that's very true in Poland. And eventually, this last October, the Constitutional Court made the decision that abortion on genetic grounds is going to be delegalized, even in the most extreme situations, like the fetus is going to die soon after the birth. And actually, in Poland, like in Gibraltar, the law is being regulated not by the constitution, but by the legislative. However, the Constitutional Tribunal can be asked about whether the law that has been passed is constitutional or not. And since we are having extremely conservative and I would say even illegal constitutional court for many other reasons, I'm not going to go into it. So this decision has really has nothing to do with the constitution, because according to the Polish constitution, women have to, have right to dignity, to freedom, to health, not to be tortured. And what happened, the decision of the Constitutional Tribunal completely ignored women's constitutional entitlement and only focus on the rights of the fetus. As a result of that, now this extreme legislation has been passed. You probably must have heard about the social movements, women's strike that have been protested in the streets. Myself, which I'm with the Left Party, and there are many women in my group which are very committed to reproductive rights. We've been going to those marches as well. And the situation is very dramatic because in Parliament. I'm a chair of Women's Rights Group, a parliamentary group of women's rights, and 2 weeks ago I organized a hearing on the effects of this legislation, like half of year after the introduction of this repressive decision of the Constitutional Court. What does it affect on women? And doctors spoke, women spoke, organizations spoke, and the situation is really, really tragic. Women are so disempowered and completely insecure. Woman, once she gets pregnant, she completely loses control of her life. And what is even worse, doctors are so scared, and they don't. I mean, even if they would like to support and help women, they are just afraid. So women are completely alone. And actually, women's movement, there are some groups which provide abortions, organized abortion tours, thanks to Women on Web or some other networks, so that women could go abroad or receive pills. So this is the way how the abortion women are now have to rely of underground networks of women if they want to have access to abortion. So in my one point, I will say, what is the issue? I mean, what are the priorities for women's movement and women's politicians? There are like two. One is to deal with the concrete situation right now and try to help women in those situations. But the other one is also to promote legislation. We know that liberal legislation, and of course we are aware that there is no chances right now in our political context to pass legal abortion, but we have to do it. For example, now there is an initiative of women's strike and women's parliamentarians, myself included. We formed a civic committee on legal abortion, and we started to collect signatures for that. So we wait for the decision of the Speaker of Parliament for the registration of the committee. Then we are going to collect signatures, and this is important so that in Parliament we hear the voice of women, not only of fundamentalists, because those fundamentalists are not happy at all. They don't stop. They even, again, they throw another piece of so-called legislation to completely ban abortion, to equal the life of a woman and the fetus, that the crime, I mean, there will be the same, the abortion will be treated like killing the person which is born. So to abolish the how to say, border between the life and I mean the fetus.
Wanda, it's remarkable what you're saying, because it's so, I mean, and I want to bring you in here as well, because you know what you're saying is so reminiscent of the situation in Ireland, what it previously was. And you know, the amendment that came in 1983 equated the right to life of the woman with the fetus. And it sounds like what you're saying is that there's a push for something like that in Poland. Alva, I mean, I'm just getting sort of shivers down my spine listening to these women and the situation in their respective countries. You know, can you talk a little bit about where we're at in Ireland, but also maybe parallels or lessons learned, or you know, that can apply to these other jurisdictions?
Well, you know, first of all, the first thought that really occurs to me, just listening to the three wonderful women here this evening, you are frontline fighters one way and another in your different spaces, and thinking that here we are across two continents in political situations which are really quite different, I think, in each country. but that there is so much that is so familiar, there are so many common threads. I was just thinking of them in every case. We all talk about travel, we all talk about faith, and particularly in a number of countries about Catholicism. We think about the impact of this hugely restrictive regulation of abortion or denial of abortion, its impact on minorities, on women and pregnant people who are specifically disadvantaged, who are, explicitly disadvantaged and marginalized. And also that it is never straightforward, that women simply, we can't experience our bodies properly, fully. We don't enjoy the freedom of our bodies, because even when we do have laws on abortion, we are constantly looking over our shoulders to see. You did have a law in Poland. There was, there still is for the moment, Roe versus Wade in the States. Ireland and Gibraltar didn't have laws, but Gibraltar had and still has Spain, and Ireland had the UK from the 1967 onwards. So that abortion is there absolutely all the time, but we cannot take our eye off that situation for one single moment. And I just think that, for all the differences between our different countries, there is a huge amount that is in common, and that fundamentally is the misogyny and the patriarchy. It is always about exercising power over women, and exercising power over some women is easier for the patriarchy. Those who have least are the easiest to control and to quell, and effectively to condemn to lives of misery and suffering. I didn't mean to go in there, but I mean, it really does just strike me listening to the three of you, and you, Marlene, on the cusp of your referendum and fighting like mad, thinking of Wanda, wondering how can we continue when we've been going so long? And of course you will, you absolutely will. And I think you're going to win, Marlene, I really do. And Sonia, it is so difficult in the States because you have been fighting for so long to protect Roe versus Wade, and to stop that chipping away at the laws. But again, and it is such an incredibly vast country. It's one thing to win a referendum in a country of, what is it? I don't even know anymore, 5.5 million people, or 35,000 or 50,000 people. It's not easy. Please believe me, whether you have 5,000 or 5 million or 55 or 105 million, there are still the anti-abortionists are still there. But I mean, it is a very different task organizationally. So I have great admiration, huge admiration for all of you. And definitely, I don't think I have any lessons to teach any of you. That is for sure. You will make up your own minds and hopefully find Ireland inspiring. But I will be very brief, Lucy, just to say that there was an expectation when you have a big victory. And we did have a very big victory in 2018. Over 2/3 of the electorate voted in favour of abortion, and that was a direct reversal of the situation which had occurred in 1983. So it's really important to value that victory, but also to see its strategic usefulness. It makes it much more difficult for your current government or successive governments to overturn a popular vote of that kind. Populism can work in two ways. I am just as afraid as you are of extreme far-right populism. Of course I am. But I also value the popular vote, which actually says, do not mess with us. We are the voters, and we will throw you out, the government, if you don't do what we say. So we do have that behind us. But there is nonetheless an expectation from campaigners, and maybe particularly the less you've been exposed to the vagaries of abortion campaigning over the decades, the more you sort of feel that victory is going to solve the problem. and it's going to solve all the problems. And in fact, it's going to solve all the problems in Ireland, all the problems of racism, of ableism, of ageism, of homelessness, of poverty, ingrained poverty. It's because it's such a big victory, we could do anything. It doesn't do any of those things. It actually removes a clause from the Constitution, and you then have to go and start building all of the structures, and not just the structures, but you're about changing the culture, the medical culture, the policy-making culture, the legislative culture. And that's the point we're at the moment. So in 2019, the good news was that 7,000 women and pregnant people had abortions in Ireland. And those are women who very likely would have had to travel to the UK for an abortion, or take the abortion pill without medical supervision. Technically, they could do that, but they would not necessarily they certainly wouldn't have had a supervision at the beginning. So that's really good news. On the other hand, we have a law which needs to be clarified and which desperately needs to be extended, because we know, and we knew at the beginning, that it is deeply flawed. Because it does not seek to facilitate women to have abortions. It seeks to ensure that abortion is as scarce as possible, and is highly restricted, and is controlled. And I say, we are all of us, tied up in knots by constitutions and laws. And actually, this is the crazy part of it. Why are women's bodies tied up in law in this way? This is not okay. And this is what we now, I think, once we've got those laws that enable women for the moment to access some kind of abortion, and protecting the law that enables them to do it in the US, we then have to set about dismantling the culture which thinks that law is a solution to what is a healthcare issue. And I know the Each Woman Insurance Coverage Act in the States is actually trying to do something like that. So I certainly have a mission, which is that having got some class of a law, not much, but some class of a law, we now have to campaign for no law and proper medical care. 1 in 10 GPs offers abortion in Ireland. That's all. Only just over half of our maternity hospitals and units are providing a full abortion. So we have 1 woman every day still travelling to the UK for an abortion. And many of those are women who have a fatal fetal anomaly. And a disproportionate number are Black women living in Ireland, born in Ireland, but travelling over to Britain. Why? Because of the disadvantage and marginalisation where they live, how they live, their access to resources, and all the reasons that you know very well. So we're actually doing a 3-year review was written into the legislation itself, and we're doing that at the moment. I will save you the nitty-gritty of the detail on that, but I'm very happy to give you any information later on.
So one of the things in a struggle like this, as you all know very well, I don't, I'm just documenting it, it is sort of this idea of coalition building and bringing people together. Now, I know that, like, say, Gibraltar, Poland and Ireland, the similarities are they're all like deeply come from quite a patriarchal form of Catholicism. What I'm very interested in hearing from Sonia about how she and her career has tapped into sort of building coalitions among faith-based organizations, because as someone, I lived in the States for 20 years, and the sort of rhetoric very often is that faith belongs to the pro-life cohort of people, and I'd be extremely interested in hearing from you, Sonia, about your work in those coalitions.
Yeah, before I joined my current organization, I was the organizer for Catholics for Choice for 3 years, organizing around the country to organize people of faith and faith communities, both Catholic and otherwise, to support abortion access, because we know the majority of people of faith in this country support legal abortion, and there's nuances there. I'm not saying everyone is, on the same level of support, but generally support a legal right to abortion. And and anyone who's done any kind of clinic work knows that Catholic people, Christian people, Jewish people, they all get abortions, right? No one is not getting an abortion necessarily because they're Catholic or whatever, right? There have been times when I was doing abortion clinic work that we would see a protester who just like learned to trust you because they would see you every weekend, who would then go to the clinic to have an abortion because their abortion was the right abortion or rationalization, and then be out protesting the next weekend or so, right? So everyone needs access to abortion care. And the way we've gone about doing this work is kind of getting to your point, Alba. It's hearts and minds work. Getting a constitutional right to abortion in 73, Roe v. Wade, did not change people's hearts and minds about abortion. And actually, it galvanized the anti-choice movement into fruition in a lot of ways, because now they were trying to fight back against this, right? And they were very smart in using a very emotive, often completely wrong scientific or medical, but very emotive and spiritual language that kind of centered the humanity of the issue in the total opposite way, right? It decentered the person carrying a pregnancy while still somehow trying to confer personhood or all of that to fetuses. And I think where we kind of have been trying to push back is actually saying, actually abortion is a deeply spiritual decision that people have abortions for because that's what they feel called to by their faith or by the Creator, because of whatever reason that they feel called to that, because abortion is a moral decision. That we should not be afraid to talk about abortion access, talk about birth control as moral decisions, as spiritual decisions, because they are. And there are moral and spiritual frameworks that people operate in when they're making these decisions. And so when we're building coalitions, it's about finding, especially in the faith lens, what are those common faith values, dignity, respect, fairness, conscience, that we can speak to across Catholicism, across non-denominational Christianity, across Judaism, Islam, that are kind of baseline values that we all share, and that we then can infuse into our language and our messaging. So that's how you speak to people. You speak to them about their values. You can talk about the science of fetal development all you want. That means nothing to people, right? That's not how they experience pregnancy. It's not how they experience the decision to have an abortion or not. They experience it through the prism of the culture and society that they live in and that they're socialized in, which faith, especially in the US, which is still a deeply religious country, especially certain parts of the US, faith and faith language is a big part of how people understand and interact with the world. I'm an abortion rights activist because of my faith, because of my belief in free will, because I believe that it's a sin to usurp the communion and relationship between a pregnant person and their Creator by trying to insert your own beliefs and your own understandings of these issues at the expense of the conscious-based decision-making of that pregnant person. And so building coalitions is not easy, especially in a country as diverse and big as the US, but it starts with having a common ground that we speak to and building that language together, having a common goal, and also welcoming and recognizing, working through the tensions that do inevitably rise because, working reproductive rights, as a Black woman, it's a movement that hasn't always been friendly and open to Black and Brown organizers. It hasn't always recognized the need to incorporate a reproductive justice lens that is more expansive than simply, a healthcare access lens or a rights and legal rights lens, right? That we need to look at abortion access through the prism of class and race, immigration status, geography, the right to both have an abortion, but also the right to have a family and to have a child without, if you're a person of color, worrying about state violence or police violence, right? So taking a holistic view is another way in which we can form coalitions, even across and outside of the reproductive rights movement in and of itself.
Thanks for that, Sonia. And Marlene, I wanted to ask you, just talking about building coalition, I'm familiar with the States because I lived there for a long time, but I don't know how sort of vitriolic the debate is in Gibraltar. And I'm just wondering, how much has women's storytelling and women's stories played into your campaign? Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, Am I unmuted now? Sorry.
Yes,
Let me start by saying that your docu of the 8th is a very powerful and moving story, because it does show how organized civil society is always the driving force behind progressive change in society. And it also shows how reproductive rights has been a pivotal issue in mobilizing women to stand up for women's rights in general, because the men in general are not going to do it, and organizations, lobbies aren't going to do it. And it comes down to the issue of control, basically, which Abby was saying. Sorry, I can't say your name properly. But basically, what we find in Gibraltar is that we're not mobilized enough. It's a very small place, and government is quite centralized because it's a small community. So it's harder to find organized civil society. But the one thing I also noticed that was very inspirational in the documentary was that it talked about how the choice side was very focused on the language that they use to speak to the people in the middle, the undecided. Because let's not forget that we need to debunk the myth that when you're pro-choice, you're pro-abortion. I mean, I am a mother of 4, and a couple of them were surprises. But, you know, I didn't choose to have an abortion myself, but it doesn't preclude me from not judging women and allowing them the choice. Pro-choice is a broad umbrella. It encompasses people who are actually pro-life. And I think that the Irish referendum campaign was very successful in transmitting this, in transmitting the fact that just because you're pro-choice doesn't mean you're necessarily pro-abortion for yourself. It just means that you don't judge women and you don't restrict women. And this is what we see, unfortunately, a lot in Gibraltar, is that, you know, Gibraltar is known for having a multi-ethnic society, which actually gets on very well, and we're very proud to show that to the world. We have Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Catholics, Protestants, atheists, and everybody sort of gets along. But when this came in, we started seeing how the issue of abortion is really predominantly about control. When you have a male-dominated parliament that, you know, is actually using their platform during the abortion debate to spread misinformation, as we've seen all around, about, you know, how things go on in the womb or don't go on in the womb. I mean, if you would have heard some of the speeches, you would have just hung your heads in desperation. So we have all these issues at play. We had 2 weeks before the abortion, what was meant to be the abortion referendum last year, we had the 7 religious leaders from multi-faith standing on top of a Holocaust stone in a general park with their hands together, smiling, all male leaders, against abortion legislation. So with that, I tell you everything. And for example, on the leaders' debate before the general election, when I was debating this with 2 other male party leaders, one of the main official opposition, the leader of the opposition, was saying that perhaps for rape something could be done, and there could be some kind of rape court or something. And I was genuinely offended by this position. You know what I mean? It was just, I mean, I think he was trying to, because this is the thing, there's so much populism that they don't even take a general position. They want to please all the different factions, but in the end, it's such an insult to women. I was short of going into tears, I tell you. So we find that it really is down to women to fight this fight and stand up for each other and for themselves. It's another offensive thing to watch women against, just by virtue of being women who are anti-choice. I find that super offensive, because all we're doing is taking away the healthcare, because that's what it is. This is what I tell people. Abortions have been happening for over 2,000 years. We've got evidence from history. They're not going to stop ever. What we need is to make them safe and rare, in the sense that the moment that we open up and we legislate, it opens the doors for family planning discussions. I mean, in Gibraltar, doctors can't even say the A word to their patients who come to see them when they want to have an abortion. And in Gibraltar, if you are raped and you get pregnant and you have an abortion, you will end up in jail for longer than the rapist. So, you know, we know for a fact that laws are stacked against women. But, we go back to the reality that for as long as in a place like where I'm serving, we have a male-dominated parliament with like 10% barely of parliament being women, no one's going to stand up for us. And this is not an us versus them, because I know a lot of men who are much more feminist than women. But on the main, it has to be the women to force the issue forward, because otherwise we remain in a world of misogyny and chauvinism with a male-dominated democratic platform that just simply will not legislate in favor of women. So you were saying before about how was the abortion debate looking last year? The polls last year by a national broadcaster was at about 70% for choice, and I think the Irish one was it 60 or 70? 60 something, right?
Was it 67 or 63? I don't remember.
What you're talking about the result.
The result.
Yeah.
66.4%.
Yeah, that's it.
I should know that.
Well, we take that in a flash. So that was more or less the polls last year. But of course, like I say, considering that there's a fatigue now because of post-pandemic, I'm worried that will play in favor of the anti-choice side. And of course, they're playing the whole we spent the year saving lives for COVID, and now we're gonna kill lives, and they don't understand that there's nothing more important than standing up for the woman who needs safe healthcare and options, and maybe not an abortion. Simply the options, the safe healthcare, and the reality check that this happens all the time. I mean, I just don't understand how it is perceived that that a woman who wants an abortion is actually not going to have one because our local law says it's punishable with life imprisonment, when they can just, like I say, go down the road 20 minutes, which is what it normally would typically take for any of you, wherever you live, to get to a clinic anyway. So it just shows just how hypocritical and double standards, because everyone knows that they're going to continue happening. They just simply don't want it in our backyard. And I find that extremely offensive towards women, obviously. And I'm very much hoping that that it will be overturned. But if it doesn't, we could find ourselves in one of those situations like Cameron did with Brexit, where, he probably rested on his laurels thinking, oh, no, I'm going to be extremely democratic. I'm going to put it out to the people. And in the end, it just didn't work out very well for the UK, And if it turns out that a referendum that we didn't need had the cabinet had the courage of their convictions and put women first, we wouldn't be facing this risk. Because if this doesn't go our way, there's going to be a much bigger struggle to achieve it in the future.
Wow. I mean, I just, so much of what you say, the hypocrisy as well, it is just all so resonant. And, the experiences are there's such commonality among the experiences. Wanda, I wanted to bring you in and then open this question up for everybody. It's a question that came in from the audience, and it's, as a woman based in the UK, what can we do to show solidarity with regards to reproductive rights activists? What can we do to help from afar? What would you say to that? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Lucy, for this question. We do experience a lot of solidarity from outside, both on the parliamentary level as well as an activist level, and we value this very much, and because for us this is a sign that this is not we are crazy who struggle for women's rights, but those who really control and take and made women, in fact, reproductive slaves who are supposed to give birth no matter what will happen to them or to even to the child who is going to be born. So the truth is regarding the let's say support from abroad, and nobody is going to solve our internal problem of changing the law. This is something what we have to do. Even the European Union as a potential institution, we are part of it. Certain standards are there, but we know that these issues are not in the hard law of the European Union. So we cannot expect that the law, that this repressive legislation which we are having will change unless we are able to mobilize the society to change it. Nevertheless, of course, all signs, all expressions of solidarity, of concern, of showing what the standards should be is extremely important. As I said, for us it is important that the world is seeing the situation, is sympathizing with us, and is trying to help in whatever form. So I would say it would be great if the media, British media and others, raise the issue of the situation of women in Poland, let's say on a regular basis. Of course, that needs some encouragement. The issue needs to be raised by the politicians or, I don't know, activists, and then it gets to the media. So if there is a media coverage that comes back to Poland, and then is in a way seen by the politicians as embarrassing thing, that Poland is seen as a country where women are not free. So that's one thing. But second, I also would like to say about those women who experience the effects of the restrictive legislation, those women who need abortions. That would be great if they come to England. They would be welcome there, and they could have a service, and with some, I don't know, the discounts or whatever. I don't know how it is in terms of financial situation. I know that there are networks who help women also to go to England. I am aware of that. But not every woman is going there. I mean, is using those networks. So anyway, so that's, if there is some kind of legislation or some policy that we Polish women and other women, of course, I don't want this only to think in terms of Polish women, but Polish women are in need of abortion. There should be access, realistic access to it. So that would be extremely helpful as well.
Thanks for that, Wanda. Alva, I just wondering if you have anything to say in terms of that question around how people can help and sort of how to build this kind of solidarity. Oh, we need to unmute you. Yeah.
Sorry. I think Wanda's point at the beginning is a really very good one, that in a way, when you're dealing with the issue, the challenge, when you're involved in the struggle, that is an internal matter. And I have to say that in Ireland, people did come and say, we'll help you win this referendum. And we did have to say, look, you can help us in many ways, but you can't actually help us win the referendum, because we have to do that here in our country. We know how it works, we know, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a very important point. But the expression of solidarity is certainly important. And I know that as far as Poland is concerned, that there are a number of contacts between Polish and Irish women. A lot of Polish women living in Ireland. There are various groups. I'm part of a conversation group myself, and I know that that's really interesting for us, even just in terms of support. And I also know that Irish women have been in contact with women in Gibraltar. I'm not sure if that was with you, Marlene, but we're very aware of it. When it comes to the US, we try, but as you say, it's so vast. But, I was just thinking that, Wanda, I don't really agree with you about the EU. I think the EU, which hasn't done terribly well on COVID, it has to be said collectively, I think it could play a much stronger role. And when you think about it, they're all incredibly keen about passing laws about everything in the EU. And then in our individual countries, they want to, a huge enthusiasm for controlling women's reproductive lives by law. But can they get together at the EU to put in place a positive right to bodily freedom? And I think that that is what the EU should be doing, so that it will go out and protect women's right. So let me just say that. And then the second thing, that's only Europe. And Europe is actually not the whole world. So I think it would be extremely helpful. I think it would be very helpful if we could, at some level, begin to work on the United Nations. I've taught this for a long time, I know there is some work goes on there, but, they have funded conferences on women and so on. We need one specifically on reproductive rights, global reproductive rights. And I don't think that's the answer to everything, but it is a relatively inexpensive way for women to come together if women are paid for by the UN, because we have to develop further, I think, our international networks. And the last point I would make, Lucy, is that we can share what we have done. And if it is useful for other people, I always say that, look, there were basically three things that mattered to us, I think, hugely. One was, building coalitions, and they're difficult everywhere, big and small, Sonia. Small ones also have intense difficulty, let me tell you. Building coalitions, working together, moving beyond pro-choice groups and making it wide open. Secondly, really clear everyday messaging, being very, very clear about who you're speaking to, getting the messages right. We had care and compassion with change in there as a third C, and underlying it all, there was a kind of unspoken choice. So the three C's added up to choice. And finally, protest, getting out there, what you're doing in Poland, what you did in Gibraltar, what you're doing too in the States, because I still absolutely believe that feet on the ground terrifies the politicians. It really puts it up to them. We're not going away until you give us what we came for. That really puts an end to it.
Thank you for that, Alva. We have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I know, Wanda, you had something you wanted to add, and then I really feel like I want to give the last word to Marlene in terms of anything, because it's so immediate, in terms of anything she feels.
What about Sonia and solidarity?
Sonia and solidarity, absolutely. Well, Sonia, I'm just worried that we've got a couple of minutes left.
I can go very quickly. Of course, public pressure, even internationally, we know our Supreme Court communes with legal authorities overseas. They take a lot of, they want to be seen as prestigious, right? They want to be seen as an authority and as reasonable people to their peers overseas. So international media coverage and the feeling the eyes of the world being on the court is critical. In terms of direct support, we have an incredible network of grassroots, oftentimes women of color, Black-led organizations called abortion funds that work across the country to literally provide access to, whether it's practical support, rides, airplane tickets, hotels for people who had to cross state borders to get abortion care, or financial support. It costs a lot of money to get an abortion in this country. And if you're poor and you are on public insurance, you don't have, as Alba said, access to abortion care, although we hope to change that with the Each Woman Act. And so if you want to support that work directly, which is funding directly to people who need abortion care or support in other ways for abortion care. Abortionfunds.org is kind of the national clearinghouse organization for abortion funds that you can go to and support funds all across the country. And I would especially ask you to support funds in the South and Midwest, where a lot of these restrictions are happening, where access to abortion is sometimes down to one clinic in a state. Mississippi, for example, has one clinic. And so people need to travel greater distances. Texas is the biggest state next to Alaska, and there is people are traveling 8, 10, 12 hours overnight for abortions, and they had to wait 3 days on top of that. So abortionfunds.org is one way to directly financially support this work, but also encouraging your media to cover the Supreme Court case coming up in the fall and to get a sense of the eyes of the world on the court, especially. And just a thank you to Alba, because the work that happened in Ireland was so important, both in terms of the clear, concise messaging, and I think we can learn a lot from that work and global solidarity happening all and information sharing all over. So.
Great.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And I think what you say as well about the South and regional support is so important as well. Wanda, you wanted to jump in, I think, on something, or?
I wanted to briefly react to what Alba has said about the European Union. Yes, I fully, Alba, agree with you that should be the role of the European Union, to promote and to push for good legislation. The problem is the EU is not doing it, so that's the point. But otherwise, yes, we should be working towards the fact that the European Union is much stronger on women's rights and the legislation, and that they should be demanding better legislation for women. So that's what I wanted to say.
Here.
And Marlene, in terms of solidarity and support over the next couple of weeks for you, what are your thoughts?
So let me just pick up on something that Alba, you were talking about the UN and the Euro Parliament. I just, maybe I sound a little bit cynical here, but I don't believe we are ever going to get a majority of standing up for women's rights until we have a majority of women in these organizations. It's just a fact. So, I mean, until then, we have to just continue to keep that solidarity, like exactly what we're doing right now, right here. I mean, it almost makes me emotional to see all of you and think that this is 2021 when we are fighting for basic healthcare. And I think that the message has to be, this is not about abortion as such. This is about securing the option for healthcare for women and for being unashamedly about saying women come first. Women come before anything that is unborn. And as I say, I'm a mother, I'm empathic, I have feelings as well, but women come first. And this is what we have to keep drumming in and make sure that people understand that this is healthcare. They happen anyway, and they're going to happen. And if we don't take care of our women, they're just going to happen unsafely. And I think another point is that in moments like these, like the one that we're having right now, which Alba would have seen so clearly and lived so clearly, is that the Western democracies have to move away from religious lobbies and Christian democracy having a say on secular law, because I mean, it's a slippery slope. Obviously, every religion has its own doctrine. So which one are we going to adopt and which one are we going to go with? And one thing that we know is that most of them are always going to be patriarchal. So that's never going to work in our favor. So as well as that, in my view, where I'm coming from, I also need to strive for a more gender-balanced parliament, because if we had that, maybe we would have had enough votes to legislate and not go through this completely ridiculous exercise where women have to basically beg the electorate to let us have our bodily autonomy. So this is where we're at right now. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for your inspiration and for really giving me the strength to continue with this very worthy fight.
Wow.
I want to thank you all so much. I could keep talking to you all for a really long time, and I'm just so grateful to each one of you, Sonia, Marlene, Wanda, and Alva, and keep fighting the good fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Luck. Good luck, Gibraltar. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thinking of you, Poland, and we're behind you in the US, if that's any help.
Yes. And looking at Ireland as a model. Thank you for what you've been doing. Yes. Okay.
We'll keep going. We'll keep
Thank
going.
you so much. And thank you for that production, Lucy and Albert. It's truly inspirational and gives us all a lot of encouragement. So thank you for documenting that in the sensitive and elegant way that you did. Thank you.
Well, I have 2 partners in crime, Maeve O'Boyle and Aideen Kane. And I know they're watching. Yes. All right. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Good evening.
Thank you. Bye. Goodbye.